So my name is Jessica Hall. I'm the director of the Innovate practice at 3 Pillar Global. My colleague here, who sadly is the more capable of us when it comes to technical things, this is Erik Isaksen. He's our senior UX engineer. So what we're here to talk to today is prototyping for business outcomes. So really what we want you to be able to do is to understand and identify a business outcome, know what a prototype is and how to use it, what it's good for, that question above there, knowing how to scope the effort and manage expectations, and getting stakeholders involved, how to manage stakeholder involvement. So your first question that we were going to show you, but that's okay, is what is a business outcome? If I said to you, what's a business outcome from a project that you're working on? Does anything pop to mind? Want to share? Money, right. So let's ask an easier question. What do businesses need? And one thing that businesses need, they need capital, right? Or they need revenue. So somebody has to pay for something else, and if they don't, then none of us lovely people in this room, despite how much we love users, if no one's willing to pay for something, then we don't get jobs, and that's just terrible and awful. They also need, what else does a business need? I'm sorry, can you say that again for me, please? List growth, email, but what is that trying to accomplish? Market share? Go one step deeper. What is fundamental? Why are you trying to get market share? You need customers, right? So we need customers who are going to pay us something. What else does a business need?
A product or service?
A product or service, yeah, that would be nice. Have to have one of those. What about partners? Maybe, possibly, partners. Oh, yay. Awesome. So we have a thing, and maybe this will work too. Or not. Or not. We can just click through. All right. So let me give you a couple examples of what a business outcome is. So maybe some of our clients are startups. So they're looking to secure outside funding. So what needs to be, the business outcome that they need to drive is in order to secure funding from a private equity or venture capital. Sometimes people are looking for customers. So list growth is, I would say, a way of driving the business outcome of acquiring new customers. So maybe you have a customer in one segment, but there's somebody next to them you haven't been going after. How do you go after that customer? Sometimes we want to increase revenue from existing customers. So either maybe selling someone a premium service or doing a cross-sell play. Sometimes you need to neutralize a competitor. So we're in a space with someone else. All of a sudden there's a competitor. We got to take their knees out from under them, which sounds awful when you say it like that. But sometimes you have to neutralize a competitor. Sometimes we have to reduce cost. Maybe we need to increase the conversion rate. So we're getting a lot of people into our site, but they're not converting. Something is wrong. 60% of people, 60,000 people are coming in a month. Less than a third of that is converting. We might have a problem there. And sometimes we need to increase customer engagement.
Could you put something like enhanced reputation or address sort of negative opinions under this or under one of those categories?
Sure. So the question was about kind of reputation management, right? So where would you put that? I would say it could be its own business outcome, or it could be as a way to drive other things. So for example, if your company has a reputation for, like people who do developers at your company hate it because, they make them work crazy hours, that is preventing you from getting something. So I would say it's a blocker to achieving a business outcome. So before we move on to our fake project that we're going to go through over the course of this talk, I wanted to mention that aside from business outcomes, there are things that may not meet the definition of a business outcome, but they really impact your project a lot. And they have to do with internal pressure and external pressure. So internal pressure is new executive in role needs a win. That's not a business outcome, but you better believe that's going to impact what you're doing. So you need to know what that is. Or it could be external pressure. So external investor, you need to release some pressure from external investors. So we see them both as the internal and external. It's not necessarily a business outcome, but it definitely factors into the conversation. So we have a fake project we're going to refer to a couple times throughout the course of this talk. It's for a workshop I did in March, so I was thinking about March Madness, and I was thinking about all my friends who are Hokie fans. Any Hokie fans? Seriously? 2? Okay, whatever. Insert your college here. So here's our scenario. Our client, or the people we work for, whether you're an innie or an outie, is a local television station in a Division I college town. They want to create an app because they have relationships with the NCAA, they have a relationship with the university, and they have a lot of content. And their thought is, outside of their college town, there are a lot of people who are really excited about this football team or this basketball team. What if I could make all this content available through an app or through some other service? And maybe there's it's like tiered. So there's some content you can get for free, or some content you can pay for. So originally this was going to be set up in rounds, but that's okay. We're just going to make it work. Why don't you guys talk to yourself amongst yourselves? What's a business outcome that we need if this is our project? What should we be trying to achieve as we bring this app to life? What success is going to look like on your project? So give yourselves a few minutes, and then if anybody wants to share, they can share. Sorry, you guys are all alone here. So what are we thinking? What do you think we need to do? I think that's very simple. Getting users. How many users do you need? A lot? Think about that. How many users do you need? Okay, what about over here? Yes.
So we have a relationship with NCAA. Already? Say we had a relationship with the university as well.
Yes, we have both of those.
That's in there.
Okay, thank you.
It's already baked in. All right, other questions? We'll give you another minute.
Students and alumni would be
I'm going to give you like 45 more seconds. All right, gang, let's bring it back. I love the level of engagement. I always have that wonder of like, I'm going to ask people to do something, and they don't know the people around them, what's going to happen, and it's always very scary. Okay, you guys had one. What was yours?
Get a group of users, like a
Okay.
small, valuable group of users that could spread the word.
So this was, what they said was get a small group of users that could spread the word. So you want to, have a group of evangelists in a sense. Who else has got one? Back there.
Partnership with, since you're a local news station, you probably have some broadcast connection.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an ABC's local affiliate, trying to get another ABC market to start talking about you when the next game's coming up.
So what is that going to help you drive? I like where you're headed.
What is it going to
Oh, sorry. I should repeat. I forget. I always forget to repeat. So somebody wave at me in a nasty manner if I forget to repeat. So what I heard was make a relationship between the affiliate and the network so that maybe the network promotes your app.
Yes.
Okay. That's what
That increases customer engagement.
creates customer engagement.
Yeah, creates customers, hopefully.
Yeah. So you need to create new customers by using your broadcast partners. Who else has got one? Okay, in the back there.
We're talking about partnering with the university or alumni media to tap into a customer.
Okay. So what I heard was you want to be able to tap into the alumni in order to grow your customer base. Okay. Oh, yeah, awesome. Thank you. Who else? You guys were serious in depth. What was going on over here?
We were talking about getting advertisers as a metric that you could use, and then also social media shares of your content so that people are seeing it even if they aren't users of your app.
Cool. So what I heard was you want to be able to get social media shares and advertisers to kind of measure content. Okay, this is an outcome. Go ahead.
Well, and building on that was the idea that it could then become a platform. Why just the Hokies? Why not the Seminoles? Why not Notre Dame? So it becomes a build once, tweak many platform that becomes an extensible product vision.
Cool. Does anybody have any other things? We've heard a lot about customers. Are there other things that we need to get? Other things? Okay, back over here. Hold on, I'm coming to you. I'm going to Oprah it. That's what's going to happen.
One is the actual product.
Oh, crap. That's that. Okay. Sorry, I can only go so far.
Can you hear me? Okay. One could be an actual product or service. So, what the app might be free, giving all this information out, but what are you trying to gain from the fan base itself? So, are you partnering with the university to sell, shirts? Are you bringing back a service that you can make money off of? The business model, really.
Sure. No, that's an excellent question. Were you guys able to hear that? Okay. So really, when we talk about an outcome, we're trying to get to something. So a lot of times what we hear is, when you meet with the client, you meet with the stakeholder for the first time, like, why are we doing it? And they're going to tell you, we're going to do this because we want to get Y. You need to understand what outcome they're trying to drive. So someone said, we need to get customers. And I said, how many? And they said, a lot. You need as many customers. Let's say each customer you need a customer that's going to essentially balance out the equation of cost and revenue. Or at least someone who begins to balance out the equation of cost and revenue. So these outcomes that you mentioned, you want a certain number of shares from social media. You will need a certain number of users that you're trying to accomplish. So we had a client a few years ago who was a startup, and what they needed to be able to achieve on day one is have 2,000 users in their system. And that 2,000 users that they had by X date would allow them to get funding to go to the next round. So a lot of times when we talk about what outcomes, some of these things were great tactics to achieve an outcome, ways to do something, but the outcome is, what does this thing need to do? It needs to be able to have, 100 users by week 5. And if it doesn't have 100 users by week 5, then we have a problem. We need to go fix it. So a lot of times, you'd like to just ask your client what they're trying to do. And typically, and I use a lot of canvases, so like the lean canvas or the business model canvas. I'm sorry I don't have time to go into those today, but if you're interested in that, we can totally talk later, because I'll do like a whole hour on that and blow my whole thing. But we really have to dive deep and understand at the end of this, what do we need to drive? And if we're not driving those things, if we're not hitting our user goals, if we're not getting outside funding from outside or inside funding, if we're not acquiring customers, then we haven't driven the needle. And a lot of times UX people say, I want to be more influential higher up in the organization, but yet you don't want to be accountable to these metrics. Get in the boat all the way, which means If you need to achieve if we're trying to drive to a number, a revenue number, we're trying to reduce a cost number, trying to change a conversion rate, A, you got to know what that is, and B, everything that you do needs to be gauged towards hitting that. So get in the boat with everybody else, because sometimes we sit outside of the boat. So if we go on, cool. So anybody seen this? Right? I feel like this may be, 3-pillar may be the first place ever that I have come into an organization and not seen this on the wall someplace. So why do projects go wrong? Who has been on a project that was over budget and had really scheduled problems and did not necessarily achieve the intended outcome? Right? Yeah. Wow, that's actually pretty good. Usually it's everybody. So why did it go wrong? And the way I think about it is my mom used to be in government contracting. And when I was 7, I put together my first government contract, and I kid you, no joke, it was this big. Because that was all the requirements for every important person that they had to get their thing in. So with 6 inches of documentation, how could that possibly go wrong? Like, that's not going to go wrong at all, right? We know exactly what we want. We just gave you 6 inches of documentation as to what we want. They go wrong because no one reads requirements that are 6 inches tall. They go wrong because we do not fully understand what business outcomes we're trying to drive and what the user needs. And you know they're wrong when 2/3 to 3/3, you're 3/4 away of the project, and you know it's not going to work. And we have a joke at 3-pillar, which is if the developer is the first person on the engagement who knows, then it's going to fail. But if the developer feels like, oh yeah, no, this is totally on target, then usually you have a good thing. So, can we switch? Sweet. Our approach looks at it this way. We flip the script a little bit. We start with an idea. And if you have an idea, awesome. What does it look like? Do customers want it, and is it right for my business? And so our whole Innovate practice within 3-pillar is focused on answering these questions and answering them within 3 to 4 weeks. So we do rapid, fast cycle prototyping in order to figure out before you commit a development team to a project, what it might look like. Do our customers want it and is right for the business? So I define a prototype as a tool for testing ideas, assumptions, and customer segments that allow for quick iterations. That can be on a piece of paper, it can be HTML, it can be PowerPoint, it can be a number of things. But it is designed specifically to allow you to change it fast, put it in front of someone, and figure out. So we spend less time talking and more time testing and doing. So as we kind of circle back of what we're going to talk about, we need to take a user and business outcome-driven approach. We need to release often. We need to validate early. We need to show instead of tell. So that's a really big, powerful thing of prototypes. I like to tell the story of my former company I worked at. I happened to be on the elevator with the CEO, and I had a prototype I was working on my iPad. He said, so what are you doing? And in the elevator ride, I said, I'm doing this. And he looked at it and he clicked around. He's like, wow, that's awesome. Now, he wasn't going to approve the budget ask for just for that, but he was able to look at it and understand what we were trying to do immediately. And that, coupled with a business case, was a very powerful thing. So I'm going to turn it over to Erik.
How's everybody doing today? Awesome. Thank you, Jess. So this is there's two different ways of looking at a prototype for fidelity. So, I mean, this is actually a mock-up, I believe, that we have, and this is a different version of that. This is I think a snapshot of the actual prototype that we used for this. This was for an internal project called Product Vector, and so there's different ways of looking at this as far as fidelity and functionality. So you could, if you're testing an idea, you don't need to make this a full-fledged product, and I'll talk more about that a little later. But if you look at here, what do you notice as far as the differences go between this one and this one right away? Visual, definitely. What was the other thing? Depth. And depth, yeah. Anything else?
The hierarchy.
Hierarchy, sure. Yeah, what about color too? There's a lot more color in this one. A lot more information, a lot more data and content, right? So there's, this will add time if you're going to do this, but Jess has come up with a really good system for measuring that early on and setting those expectations. So the first one, sometimes we'll do this and we'll put this in front of somebody really quick and do just some quick images and things like that and click on. And over here, we might have a little more functionality, like a drop down or something, depending on what we put in. So typically, I'll do a lot of the HTML prototypes, but I've also done paper prototypes as well as some stuff with Just in Mind. I haven't played with Axtra, but I've heard it's very good. We would go through a typical Innovate, which would be a 4-week process. So we do a lot of research. Okay, we'd go through workshop, ideation, and lots of iteration over this. So week 2 would be more of the planning and the prototyping. So the user research will lead us to a lot of these ideas. And then we would move on to actually starting the prototyping on week 2. By week 4, we have an evaluation and a pitch deck and something that we can actually deliver to the client. So it doesn't always work out this way, but this is pretty good, actually, pretty solid. So what needs to be prototyped? How many people here have done prototypes of any flavor? Okay, awesome. So when you're doing a prototype, what do you determine? How do you determine what needs to be prototyped? Right. Okay, that's one way. You could take, take your what you want to get at the end, always keeping that in the back of your mind, and have a scenario based on that. Go ahead. Hypotheses. Okay, yes. You would want to figure out different ways to do it, you're saying, and test those out. Okay. What are some of the key things you would find in a prototype when you're approaching it, like, if you have less time or less resources, what are some factors you might consider when you're doing this?
Take the top 2 features and then try to implement a scaled-up version.
So cutting up scope, basically? Okay. So at 3-pillar, we've been doing something like this where we have a scale of fidelity, functionality.
Should you prototype a login screen?
It's a good question, Jess.
Should you prototype a login screen?
I'd say no.
Why?
Most students know how to do it, and if you have the time, that's great, but if you're trying something that they might really not understand, I'd test that first.
Right, if you're trying to do interaction paradigm, you better test a prototype. I mean, there's a standard login screen, but then there's different mechanisms you can try out.
Does it actually serve what you're trying to do, though? Or do people understand what a login screen is?
Probably depends on the
Yeah.
user group.
Depends on the target audience.
Yeah.
So here's what I said. Go ahead.
It depends on, again, what you're illustrating for what purpose. And if the purpose, if the task that you're trying to illustrate requires a login event that you need to show, you need to illustrate that in some fashion, especially if there's a state change and difference in state. The second thing is that, as Mark said, if you're doing something different, if you look at Marriott.com's sign-in, it's a different type of sign-in, and you would want to test that, because it's not just any old sign-in, right? So you want to test that.
I'd say you test it if it's unusual.
Yeah.
I completely agree. If it's your basic login screen, no.
Yeah, these are all valid concerns, for sure.
You test it if it's key to business outcome. If that sign-in is gonna make or break this product, you better test it. You test it because it's really important to the user. You test it because it's a risk, you prototype it and test it because it's the riskiest assumption. So you don't have time to do everything.
Yeah, you're not building a product. I'll talk to you about that a little bit. So definitely valid concerns. I think you're absolutely right. If there's things that need to be, they're unusual things, a different type of login like you were suggesting, for sure. But things that are basic and assumed that don't validate what you're, or invalidate for that matter, what you're trying to do, you shouldn't be too concerned with that. So with this, setting and managing expectations, right up front we say, hey, this is the level of fidelity you're going to expect. This is the visual impact you're going to have. And you decide that as the client stakeholder. With 3 Pillar, we work together to figure out sort of, that happy medium. And so the scale can go up and down. You might have some functionality. Let's say you don't have, there's certain things you need to show, but your user, for the demo purposes, if you're setting up a demo, doesn't have to actually be clickable or actually work or function, especially if you're controlling this demo. You're going to want to, keep certain functionality core, and some of it you're going to want to ignore, but show that things are there. Obviously, you wouldn't do that with a product. So content and data, too. So a lot of products we've been getting to are very data-driven lately. So we've been experimenting with some different ways to work with this, but we'll find that out early in the process with this, whether content and data will have a huge impact or not, and talking back and forth.
So Eric, let's take a pause.
Yeah. Sure, back.
So UX person question. What do you think when we say fidelity? If someone says to you fidelity, back here.
How developed the look and feel is, if it looks more like actual website versus basic wireframe. That's how I see it.
Cool. So what you said is how developed it looks and how much look and feel you have based on wireframe. That's exactly it. In a awful, never would say it in front of a client, how pretty it is, right? So you need to understand what the level of fidelity is. So when I do this, I draw these 3 lines on the board. I talk to a client, I'm like, where do you think we should be on this prototype? And we draw it on the board. And they usually start with something and it's like, that's great. So are we adding more people and time to this project? Or are we we're sticking with our initial scope and timing? And then we might have to renegotiate a little bit.
If these are all aligned over here, but you're going to set that expectation and say, hey, that's great, we'll gladly do that, but here's what needs to happen to do that.
So this helps you manage the trade-offs because you're going to have to manage trade-offs. Let's be clear on what you did. And you mark it up, write it down, and when you talk about fidelity, maybe see an example. Because if you don't set your expectations and manage them appropriately, you are in deep, deep trouble, especially in a prototyping effort.
Just two suggested emendations would be icons on the left and right where you have a sketch over here and a screenshot on the right, and a JavaScript do it so that as you push it to the right, it increases the number of dollar signs and the number of clocks.
Maybe it's ka-ching noise.
It's ka-ching noise. This is 1 ka-ching. This is 2 ka-chings. I like it. So a lot of times when I do this, what we're trying to figure it out. And at the beginning of an engagement, you saw that we start with a workshop. Those are 6 hours long. So we have those conversations through it and really to understand where we're going to be, what has to be function, and what the functionality is. So this is really important. I'm going to take a pause. Have you seen in these last 2 slides, we showed you a lot of process stuff. Can we go back up to the... one more, there we go. And so this one is really how our process works. So typically we plan on Mondays, we demo on Wednesday, we test on Friday.
So for developers, that's basically a 3-day sprint.
Yeah, it's a 3-day sprint with a pushy product manager and designer hybrid who's just a pain. Oh, wait, that's me. So if you can't see it from back there, and we'll put these on SlideShare. So, it's this quick difference. And then we haven't talked about it yet, but we do something we like to call a product pitch deck as part of this offering. It's 10 slides long. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you guys use any frameworks then? Or is this speaking too long?
So when you say frameworks, you mean technical frameworks? Yeah, so we've experimented with a lot of things. We've done AngularJS, we've used Polymer. I find working with web components really fascinating. So I've been trying to build out components. The structure of these things and the throwaway nature of them doesn't always lend to the reuse part of it, but it's a good place to, we have a lot of flexibility as far as what we use, jQuery, Bootstrap, and all that we used. But we use a lot of tools too to accelerate that, like build tools like Grunt and things like that.
Other question?
You guys have any thoughts on managing the data component of prototyping? So, Capital One Labs, we do a lot with very large data sets.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the data scientists will have some conflict sometimes with the design side. So you prototype it looks awesome.
Yeah.
All your data is beautiful. And then it
Like
turns out to be
super
really
simple.
sparse.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. I understand that challenge intimately.
Yeah. So the question was, how does data like play a factor into this, and how do you deal with large data sets in the prototyping? So where data is relevant, we want to work with the data. We started one of the earlier prototypes. We did a lot of lorem ipsum type stuff, and what we found was that when you do the user testing with that, people are like, "Yeah, I get the header because that has real text, but I don't have any content." So through some iterations, we found a few different ways. One of the ways lately we've been doing, and I'll talk about this later, was we've been using, like a Dropbox or a Google Drive to hold JSON files or even CSV files, depending if we're working with visualizations. And we'll have the actual clients be involved with that and edit those files. So you have some control as far as the client feels much more involved with that, which is great. There's other ways we've done this too. We worked with a database at one point. We found that was way too much overhead, but there's a definitely, you have to identify the content areas and the data that you need to display, and the ones you can just do a screenshot of and paste that into that area. What's going to change, basically? Does that answer your question?
Well, to be a little more specific, we've had experience where you prototype something, and it turns out the actual data that it depends on, you think there's like 6 categories that are going to show something interesting and relevant. It turns out only one of those has any like dense data. So the prototype was sort of contingent on this idea that we have these 6 fields that for 99% of our data aren't populated.
But that sounds like a very successful prototype. You've invalidated.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
in terms of like managing that back and forth of like, it takes time to get the data and compile it. Where do you work that into your prototype space?
Yeah, so the comment was that, as far as there was too much, there was some data dependencies, and when you actually did the prototype, there was some issues where the data didn't work out as well as you had, as expected, basically. And so, so that invalidated the theory of the data. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It had an impact on the design.
And it had an impact on the design. Okay. All right. Any other comments on that?
Just related to the chart, what are you testing on the first Friday? No prototyping is happening yet.
So that's to you.
So typically what we would have is we'd do paper, or we'd have a wireframe in week 1. So we would maybe do like an OmniGraffle or like a prototyping tool in week 1 in order to get out and start to get some feedback. We find that also helping clients get used to, it helps to have them in the rhythm. They know what the cadence of what's going to happen is. They have certain expectations, and someone mentioned the challenge of selling this, and one is if I can get to Friday and I have some real user feedback, now I can really get someone to buy in. When I talk to a client on the phone, we're doing, business development, and they say, okay, well, I don't know, this is going to take too long, this is going to slow the project down. I'm going to be ready to test in the first week. And so you can start to build in. So it may just be paper on the first week. Week 2, we actually we're in the middle of one of these right now, and we had a test on Friday. And got a lot of great feedback. I've already got people scheduled for next week, so if tomorrow we decide to radically change the plan, which we might, we're still going to hit Friday. So we move pretty quickly. Yep.
Rapid user research is 5% of the project, but you're doing testing. Who are you testing, and are you using that as part of your user research?
Sure. So we do a little bit upfront, and I generally call it rapid user research because I think sometimes, especially a lot of the executives I've dealt with, tend to associate user research, and I do not agree with this association, just for the record, with months, lots of time, lots of money, and a PowerPoint deck to nowhere. Sorry. So when we do research, we'll do a day or two of research. We'll do interviews. I might do interviews actually. This last one we did, I did interviews across the entire week and was constantly inputting into. So really, user research is built into the entire 4 weeks rather than a lot of user research up front. So this is more, and I should probably tell you, as I was looking, I was like, my question I would ask is, what do the teams look like? So typically, these are teams of 2 to 3. It'd be a product manager, a UX person, and maybe, like a UX engineer like Erik who's building the prototype. So the UX designer and the prototyper would probably be allocated pretty close to 100%, and then the product manager would come in or out. And I come in and out depending on where the engagement is. So it's really a small team for a fixed amount of time.
One thing I found as far as implementing these with HTML, and also if we have an innovate that will go that will be much more as far as the needs. It'll take more people to add to it. We have awesome developers in India and Romania, and so for the first time I think in my development career I've found that that's actually a real good advantage as far as and I mean that awesome because we have an awesome team over in Cluj, in Timisoara, and over in Noida, because my previous experience with overseas was the time difference was very hard to deal with. But because there's 2 of us, it's a small team, now that time difference is great because we have this slight overlap. That person takes over, so you're constantly going. So even though, for a larger project, even though it's like 3-day sprint, we have that advantage there. Yeah.
Yeah. So
you have people building when there's design?
Usually there's at least the initial set of wireframes are roughed out wireframes go first. And then actually to minimize waste, we usually do a sketch on a piece of paper, take a picture of it and say, let's do this. And the gap, obviously I see people laughing. Why are we concerned? Because sometimes you do that. Oh, okay, good. I was like, Now, I would say the type of people we put on this are very good at making and managing that gap. We look for people who are very comfortable with ambiguity and who want to step in and interpret and explore. So if it's the type of person who's like, if I don't have the clear wireframes and very specific, in directions on what I should do, they probably are not going to be on engagement like this one. So most of the team is very flexible. They respond well, they interpret, they fill in. So once we get rolling, we're doing design as we go. And it's usually, it could be a wireframe, could be like a couple of different styles of things on a page, could be a sketch. And those are just getting injected immediately into the project. So we try to reduce waste.
In terms of this whole process, are these just features that you're prototyping, or what's the outcome? I'm not sure I understand.
Sure. So typically what we try to do is, I'm sorry, let me repeat the question. So you said, are these just features we're prototyping? I would say there's 2 ways to do prototypes, or there's probably, there's more than 2. A lot of times what we do in our initial product, we're just trying to prove out this idea. So we will take you through a part of the experience so that you can get a sense from customers whether or not this product is going to work, and that might be something they'd be willing to pay for or that our client is willing to fund. So really you have to take a big chunk at a very, very shallow level. Now, we would also, and sometimes in some of our longer engagements when they're doing a new feature, they'll prototype out the whole feature. and experiment with a bunch of different ways to do the feature. So while the focus of this talk is more about doing early validation, because that's typically, it's a big part of, it's what I do and what Erik does, that doesn't mean that if you're in the middle of a long-term engagement or you're just trying to start out a new feature that you can't use prototyping, because you absolutely can. That's an excellent question. Thank you.
So I have a related question. So if you're in an engagement where you're interested in testing a larger scope of functionality, do you still maintain this cadence, or do you actually expand it so it's like a 2-week cycle, instead of a 1-week cycle?
Sure. You probably heard that question because he used the microphone. Yes, the short answer is yes. If you can go. We generally do 2-week sprints for everything. Oh, I'm sorry. Outside of these really fast rapid prototypes, we run 2-week sprints, and we have something we call adaptive PLM, which is our flavor of Agile. And our flavor of Agile is specifically designed around remote teams and mixed teams. So we usually would have a situation where part of the team is client, part of the team is us. So if we wanted to do something more complex, then yeah, this would change substantially. We'd probably go into 2 weeks. We might, if depending on the type of feature, we might have to go to like a staggered sprint approach where we're doing design up front and then testing. It really depends upon the complexity that you're trying to work with. Okay?
At which point are you defining the user stories and use cases?
Ooh. I'm glad you asked because I did not put that in here. So at which point we're defining the user stories. We're a Jira shop, although we'll use whatever clients use. So we actually use Jira for this. I'm kind of interested in exploring some of the other tools. So if you have thoughts, then let's totally talk about that. But we use Jira. We do have user stories. And we mostly use them for accountability, and so we're on track. But the user stories, rather than being this big, so being very big, they're very shallow and fairly simple. Do you want to?
Yeah, typically there's very, very like 1 sentence, 2 sentences, right, of description. Like the tickets, it's been like, as a developer, coming from large corporations where your tickets are like, you have to scroll to see everything, and then there's all the images at the end for acceptance criteria and everything. This is really like 1 or 2 lines and go, because we're constantly collaborating and talking together. So we don't need as much. We need some guides, something in the background for that. As far as the user stories go, I'm not as familiar, but Jira in general is very shallow for these type of engagements.
Pretty shallow stuff. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry. So do you define these throughout the process? Are you making them more granular, or is it something you start during the workshop kind of part? My question is basically, because you need to build something in the prototype, so I guess you need to define a portion of that before you start building anything.
Yeah, so the question is, is everything predefined before we start actually prototyping? And the answer is no. We're constantly moving and changing. Tomorrow, we may have a situation for this current prototype where, hey, things don't work, it blows up, our idea just doesn't, it's not jiving, so we need to just change it and just keep moving to another direction with it.
Just to be clear, this process is to get to the point of a sale for you and your client to come to an agreement to proceed with the project forward.
It's not really tied to sales.
When I see pitch deck, though, that's what I think of.
Oh, okay. So let me say it. So the question was, is it designed to get to a sales decision? Oh my God, really? 10 minutes? Wow, that just went so fast. Oh yeah. Oh, cool. Thanks. So wow, now I have to refocus on the question. Say it again.
The pitch deck is a deck not for a sale for a project, but...
So I gave you an example of when I was in the elevator with my CEO and I showed him a prototype and it got him excited and he got it. He was not ready to make a funding decision based upon that. Whether he's a private equity firm, a venture capitalist, or it's a big organization and they need to make a decision about spending, one of the things we like to do is create a product pitch deck. That is a product pitch deck for our client to use with their internal stakeholders. It is not a document, so yeah.
It's not a product, it's not a finished product.
It's not a finished product. The idea is we want to get you to that point where you can make a decision. Are we going to go ahead and commit the big bad dollars for a design team, or designers and QA and developers and all of those things, or are we going to pivot, or are we going to abandon this? So at the end of these 4 weeks, now granted, this is how we do it, so you can do it different ways. We like to make sure we can get to that pitch deck place. I also came a little bit from management consulting, and I couldn't tie my shoes without being able to make a business case. So sometimes I like to be able to have a tool for my clients so that they can educate their internal stakeholders and make a decision. So that's why we do a pitch deck. Cool. All right.
So we discussed a lot of this as far as demo planning goes. So I always try to keep in the back of my mind, and I think the rest of us do on the team, is what are we actually trying to validate? What are the things that we want to disprove or prove? You know, how is that going to help our clients? How is it going to help our clients' users? So who's driving that demo? So we need to stack the deck, as Brandon put it this morning for his talk. Basically, we need to, for the most part, what we do is we'll say, here's the script for this. Let's figure out the script and let's have control of it. Sometimes in engagements we'll actually give the client control, but it depends on how much time, how much we're comfortable with that. But it's usually guided through to test certain things. Like we'll take them to a certain point and then say, well, what would you expect to see next? Where would you find this? Typical questions that you would ask in standard user testing, right? So. And then there's the other factors too, like what needs to be functional versus static, and I talked about that. A lot of prototyping ends up being smoke and mirrors. So as much as I'm using, a higher, not higher, but more modern JavaScript frameworks and all sorts of things, there's a time when, GIFs just popped into a table is acceptable for prototyping because of time constraints. Because of things that, the purpose of it is not to have this glorious HTML5 application that you can show your user, but it's to test and validate, what you're trying to do. So deciding what's functional versus what's static. And the role of data is very important. We're finding more and more we need to constantly iterate over this idea of do we engage clients and allow them to interact with this, or do we, have data that we're in control of? Do we display data on every page, parts of the page? What's important to validate everything? So, trying to validate underlies everything here. Any questions?
I have a question. So you're building this really quick prototypes, and sometimes you're taking these shortcuts. How do you manage expectations from having something that looks like it's real, that works like it's real, and then saying this is going to take 6 months, a year to, I don't know.
So I'll give this to Jess, but I do want to say though, upfront managing that expectation is so key. And talking with the client and having them understand that. Because we had one prototype, actually one of the first ones that I worked on at 3 Pillar, where the fidelity was very low, and they were like, well, when are the colors coming, and when is the we need some nice borders here, and we're like, that's not the point. But I'll pass this off to Jess for the full answer.
So when I started this practice at 3 Pillar, I said the most important thing I have to do is make sure that everybody on the team manages expectations. And if we don't, we're dead. Right out of the gate. So it starts from the initial conversation. If, whoever is talking about prototyping first, they need to set the expectation. That needs to be set early. It needs to be set often. And it needs to be refrained. So what I normally say in this instance, a prototype is not about code. The idea that has been tested, that has been validated, that represents something that customers want, that's right for our business and developers understand is where the value is. That's the value. How much money will an organization spend doing a strategy session of many months to creating the PowerPoint to nowhere and end up with nothing? So the validation of the idea, the experimenting and the learning that we've gone through in a few weeks to do prototyping is where the true value lies. So, and we do set that expectation in front. You're going to see something that's really good and you'll be able to demo it, but it's very much the way I explain it. It's kind of like a movie set, right? If you're in the front, it looks awesome and it's beautiful. When the director changes his mind for the 18th time, because he used to work in TV, you can just move that thing around. But behind it there is no structure. So you have to create the model, and once everybody agrees to what the model is, then we can go out and build it faster. And everybody's going to be aligned to the vision, aligned to the business outcomes we're trying to drive, and we can get some value. But you are totally right, Mariana, that if we don't manage those expectations well, that we're getting in trouble. And I see consternation next to you. Or are we pondering? Okay. Are we thinking about a personal problem? Okay, a personal business problem, I guess. All right, cool. So how are we doing on time?
3 minutes till 3.
Okay, so I'm gonna hand it back to Eric. He's gonna talk through one bit, and then I will stay as long as y'all wanna stay. And I mean, I guess you might too.
So effectively engaging with the client. So for me, as a developer, a lot of times, since I started as a designer and moved into development, I have a different perspective than a lot of back-end developers, I think. But what's interesting too is I love people and I love interacting. So to have a client engaged on this is really key for me to have it successful. So reading when you go in, you talk with clients and you go through, business model canvas and things like that, and you get a sense of who they are and what they want to do as far as their engagement level. Then you can engage figure out what can I do to communicate with them as much as possible. So like some clients would prefer emails. Some, you want to catch them on, Google Chat or something, or whatever they're using, you'll want to use, and you'll want to be there for them if they have questions, but also proactively talk to them. Just ask them random questions, depending, once you feel them out and you figure out what level they want to be at. And you can, like the data idea, as far as we talked before, having the clients actually change how that prototype's going to look by just editing a file. Yeah, maybe that's a little much overhead for the prototype, but that engagement makes them more apt to contribute more. And the more feedback you get quicker, the better it's going to be. And the other thing too is to show quick changes. So if I make some change, it's sort of like in Git if you're familiar with version control, like you want to make your code examples, you want to commit very small, very often. And so when you commit code to the server and you can see the changes within a couple of hours, you can email or IM or phone the client and say, hey, these changes are there, can you just take a look? And if it's something smaller, they're more apt to take a look if they know you. So those are typical things that I've been using. I'd really like to get ideas of how people have, maybe we could do this over the break if people want to stay, but what your ideas of client engagement are, like what success stories you've had with that. And as far as key takeaways, I think we talked about this a lot. Engage early and engage often. And that goes back to the communication. That goes back to, doing the code commits frequently. The communication is really key in the collaboration, internally and externally. So this is a fast process. If people aren't looking around to see what's happening, some things may get lost along the way. And always test for the business outcomes. Always keep in mind, what do I want to validate? What do I want to invalidate? What do I want to do with this? Not, I want to build this awesome product, because it's not a product. Okay, it's to test, to lay the framework for, or the groundwork for building a product. Should I actually build this? Is it worth it? And for the last one, I'll pass it off to Jess.
Cool, and my last one was just to start small, but just start. If you're already doing them, awesome. Let's continue the conversation. A lot of people, and I particularly, I gave a talk similar to this to the Intelligence Community Interactive Association. I'm like, gosh, that must be the hardest group to ever like change management. Can you believe like a bunch of like intelligence community leadership? And what I said is start small, but start. So you don't necessarily have to get approval in order to sketch something on a piece of paper and show it to a few people. There's a lot of free prototyping tools or ones that don't cost very much. So you can mock it up and put it on someplace and get some feedback and put it in front of your customers. But start small, you'll be able to gain the momentum you need within the organization. And I think we had a question earlier at the beginning about what the ROI is. The ROI is in that early understanding of value so that your customer or your client or your stakeholder, whoever you're working with, knows that when they have the confidence to commit a development team to something that's going to generate value for your company, as opposed to that thrashing at the beginning of the project where you have a team of 10 and they don't know what they're doing. That's a lot of lost hours. That's a lot of lost dollars early on. So if you want to flick to the end, yeah, because we haven't been doing QA like the whole time. I love it, by the way, because this is the most engaged, like question-filled thing I've seen all day. So that's great. And if we want to go to the last one, like I said, we're hiring a senior UX designer. If you know anybody or you're interested, come talk to me. If you don't want to like show your teammates that you're interested, email me later. So we're definitely looking. We're in the market. That's us. We've been doing this for several months now, but we've learned a lot, but there's still a lot more out there in the world. And thank you all for your really awesome questions. So what other questions do you have? What other things can we help you with today? Cool. Wow, that's for once we're quiet. Okay, Day. Cool. That's a great question. The question was, how does the team work together and collaborate? For the most part, actually, we use Google Hangouts a lot. We use chat. We email. We get on the phone. So we have like daily meetings. We have a schedule we work off of. Here's when we were talking to each other, and here's where we're talking to the client. But then there's a lot of back and forth interactions. Part of our team on our last engagement was in India, so I would get up early, he would stay up late, or Erik would do that. We'd shift our hours, and a lot of times some of our people are in remote sites, so it can work remotely. If you have the right tools and you have the right culture and it's the right people. When I staff one of these engagements, I have a profile in my head of what I'm looking for. It has to be someone who's fast on their feet, who's okay with change, and who's willing to dive in and just figure it out. And that's not everybody. So I look for people who I think are really going to be the right kind of people for this, which means sometimes they're not going to be great for like sustained engineering projects that have to be super detailed and totally cross-browser and check all the boxes. Some people may be great at that and they may not be great at this, and that's okay. Cool. And we used to work together, so he knows how crazy I am. Cool, any other, Mariana?
So once you have these prototypes, how much exposure do you give them? Is it for the team? Do you put them out there, user validate?
It's very dependent on the client, for us at least. I would say they're up on a server, the client has the username and password, they can distribute it however they like. If they're gonna show it to external people, we usually ask them to give us a heads up, so we're not deploying a build right in the middle of their demo or right before it. Because we have a client who has clients. So it's usually up on a server, and even, we always use we have a server that we dedicate toward this and folks around it, because usually even if they have the capability to stand up the environment, their IT team doesn't have time to do this. So we can stand up an environment like this and get going. But, you know, you can use any kind of tools and lots of different things. But how wide you go with it is really dependent, and I tend to like to be involved when like people are seeing it, so that I can really get that immediate feedback rather than having that disconnection between you saw it an hour ago and then you wrote an email and then we did something else and now I've lost that connection.
What's great too is we're all together, like even if we're remote, we're all collaborating at the same time. Because in some cases, when you're in certain development cycles, you know, the design has already been done, the user testing has already been done in some cases. So like there's a small overlap in that, but in this case it's total. Like you're working together, oh wait, no, that's probably not technically gonna work. We'll probably have to do this way. Or hey, wait a minute, technical guy, this can't be designed that way. We need to figure that out.
Oh, the last thing I was going to say, important for a prototype, it is not designed with the big D, is what I like to say. When you're prototyping something out, don't get stuck in it. What I would say to a developer is, I don't care if it doesn't work on Chrome. Because if I'm only ever going to show it on Chrome, that's all that matters in my world. I don't care if it takes 2 minutes to load, as long as I can load it before the demo. I know that might like freak people out. If you're a designer, the important thing is we understand what the value of that control is and what people want to do with these features and what actions people want to take. I do not care if that control is not perfect, because we have an opportunity. We do when we're actually making the product, we'll take the time to do that refinement. But everybody's got to step back from perfect and polished and put stuff out there that's rough and dirty and work with it. And everybody's got to stay focused on the problem in front of them, not the problem that's 2 years away. Because scale doesn't matter until we know we have something that's going to actually work. So you have to stay focused on that problem that's right in front of you.
Compared to like a minimum viable product, a lean startup kind of product.
Uh-huh.
A little different from this, I guess, because you have a throwaway prototype. Is that basically because this is the type of project where the decision hasn't been made to go forward versus
Sure.
a lean startup? Commitment or
Yeah. I stayed away from MVP because I was like, oh, I don't want to go there. But that's okay. So it depends. So if we think about in the lean methodology, there's a minimal viable product. Now that could be a landing page. That could be some sort of concierge experience. There's a number of ways to to create and test an MVP. I would say that the first thing we go out to, the first prototypes we do effectively are actually, we make MVPs. I would kind of think of them as fitting into that MVP mold. We're just trying to get something out in order to prove and validate an idea. So we very much take a lean approach to things. But I tend to not, especially with different kinds of, avoid the MVP lexicon because I find it causes a lot of confusion, and I don't, Erik Ries is a nice guy. I gave him a tour of the museum years ago, but I don't want to get in a religious debate about him. So I usually avoid that term when I'm talking to customers. But effectively, what we've talked about, these are MVPs, the way I see it. Huh? Yeah. Nice. Okay, thank you guys. Anyways, get us in touch later.